Deadlock has been an absolute blast so far, and we're having a ton of fun playing it. Now, we've teamed up with the best experts to bring you all the top builds and guides for every single hero in the game. So click the link below to head to our website and check out those builds for yourself. There are a total of 22 Deadlock heroes currently in the roster. So today we're going to quickly be going over all of their abilities and what they all do. As new heroes are added to the game, we'll continue to make these ability overviews as soon as they're released. So check back whenever to keep yourself up to date. Right, well, let's go from A to Z today and start off with the first hero, Abrams. Abrams is a close-range, crowd-controlling, gap-closing tank with a pretty easy-to-learn kit that fits into most team comps. He can frontline incredibly effectively with his survivability through his passive, but also deals some surprising damage too if built correctly. Abrams' first ability is Siphon Life, which drains health from enemies in front of him whilst they're in the radius. Maxing this allows him to siphon life more often, for longer, and deal more damage with it too. His second ability is Shoulder Charge, which charges forward, colliding with enemies and dragging them along with him. Maxing this allows him to use it more often, go further each time, and grants a damage buff after bouldering enemies into walls. His third skill is Infernal Resilience, which is a passive skill that regenerates a portion of incoming damage over time. Maxing this skill gives him more health and more regen, allowing him to get stuck in and frontline more effectively. Then we have his fourth ability, Seismic Impact. Here he will leap high into the air and choose a ground location to dive and smash into. When he lands, all enemies in the radius are damaged and stunned. Maxing this lowers its cooldown, buffs him up with more damage and health when successfully connecting, and also with the max upgrade turns him into a CC immune monster, tearing through everything in his path. If you love tanking and spanking your way through fights, engaging for your team, and leading the line for your friends, give Abrams a go. Bebop is Deadlock's signature hook character who provides a ton of playmaking potential with creative combos and outplays. Unlike some hook characters from other games, Bebop has a lot to offer outside of just his hook though, with AoE bombs and a laser beam, so there are a number of different ways to build and play him. His first ability is Exploding Uppercut, which deals light melee damage to nearby units and sends them flying back, causing area damage where they land. Maxing this ability unlocks his combo potential with more uppercuts, more buffs to make him more deadly, and instant hook resets at max rank. With those hook resets, he can now do this combo, where he uses his hook, then uppercuts straight into a second hook. His second ability is Sticky Bomb, which attaches a bomb to a nearby target that deals explosive damage after a short fuse time. Every hero he hits gains extra bomb damage, and you can even cast this on yourself before you get up close and personal. Maxing this skill lets you use more bombs more often, increases the base damage, and unlocks disarm debuffs when you land it. Bebop's third ability is his signature hook ability, which launches out a hook that grabs and reels in the first enemy or friendly hero that it hits, dealing damage if the target is an enemy. Maxing his hook increases its damage, almost doubles the cast range, and turns the skill into a base 10-second cooldown, allowing you to start fishing and spamming for kills super often. Finally, we have Bebop's fourth ability, which is his Hyper Beam. Here he will charge up his laser to unleash a torrent of energy, dealing damage and slowing enemies' movement and their dashes too. Bebop himself will have slow movement and turn rate for the duration, and if activated in the air, he'll hover whilst unleashing the beam on his enemies. Maxing this ability reduces the cooldown significantly, gives more DPS and even some healing too. If you've always loved hook characters, or if you're a fan of firing your lasers, give Bebop a go. Dynamo is a support who can create huge plays offensively or defensively. He aids his team with heals and buffs and is a fantastic addition to any team comp. Even though he might be a support, he definitely can carry in the right hands. Dynamo's first ability is Kinetic Pulse, which releases an energy pulse that knocks up enemies into the air. Maxing this adds a firing and movement speed debuff to enemies and increases Dynamo's damage output to those enemies hit. His second ability is Quantum Entanglement, where he briefly disappears into the void and then reappears a short distance away. When he reappears, his weapon is reloaded with a fire rate bonus for the next clip. This can also be used to bring nearby allies with him and give them a half fire rate bonus too. Maxing this increases its range and unlocks more potent buffs upon reappearing, making it stronger in both offensive and defensive situations. His third ability allows him to channel to restore health over time to himself and nearby allies. Maxing this turns him into an ambulance with increased mobility, more frequent healing, and even lets him shoot, use abilities, and basically do anything whilst channeling when fully upgraded. Finally, we have Dynamo's fourth ability, Singularity, which pulls in nearby enemies and damages them. When this ability finishes, all enemies get knocked up into the air. Maxing this emphasizes his playmaking potential with an increased radius, a longer duration, and additional damage too. If you've always wanted to play a mobile healer with a ton of creative ways to outplay your enemies, give Dynamo a go. Grey Talon is a long-range bow-wielding elder with traps, arrows, and even a deadly owl to help take down his enemies. He has tons of DPS, whether it's bursty poke or sustained barrages, and has the unique ability to make an impact from across the map with his ultimate. Grey Talon's first ability is his charge shot, which as you'd expect, charges up a powerful shot that pierces through enemies. Maxing this allows him to spam it more often with an extra charge, a reduced delay, and it increases its damage output too. His second ability is Rain of Arrows, which launches him high into the air and allows him to glide slowly above his enemies, granting extra weapon damage and adding multi-shot to his weapon whilst he's airborne. Maxing Rain of Arrows lets you stay up high more often and offers a ton of extra bonuses whilst picking off enemies from above. His third ability is Immobilizing Trap, which throws out a trap that arms and when triggered immobilizes an enemy. Maxing this lets you place more traps more often and with a longer duration, but also adds bullet damage to immobilized enemies. Finally, we have his fourth ability, Guided Owl, which launches a spirit owl to control that explodes on impact, damaging and stunning all enemies in its area. It also grants permanent spirit power for each enemy killed with this ability. Maxing this increases the owl's base damage, lowers its cooldown, and even adds an execute once fully upgraded. The sooner you max this, the easier you can build up those permanent bonuses to ramp up into a late game monster. If you're a fan of that ranger playstyle with arrows and artillery from above, give Grey Talon a go. Haze is a stealthy rogue-based hero with the playstyle of isolating enemy carries, flanking behind enemy lines, and causing havoc with enemies trying to keep track of her. She also has a ton of AoE teamfight damage with her bullet dance ability, which if used at the right time can clean up fights in a matter of seconds. Haze's first ability is her Sleep Dagger, which throws out a dagger that damages and sleeps the target. They'll wake up after a brief delay or when damaged. Throwing this dagger doesn't break invisibility either, which allows for some creative ways to assassinate her enemies. Maxing this reduces enemies' stamina and bullet resist when hit, and lets you use it more often with a lower cooldown. Her second ability is Smoke Bomb, which allows her to fade out of sight, becoming invisible and gaining sprint speed. Enemies close by will be able to see through her invisibility, and attacking enemies will remove the stealth too. Maxing this almost halves its cooldown, grants additional sprint speed while stealthed, and grants bullet lifesteal too. Her third ability is Fixation, which increases bullet damage on a target recently hit, and gives more stacks per bullet hit for headshots. Maxing this one makes your left click primary fire much stronger, as it adds more spirit damage, slows, adds a longer duration, and applies max stacks, whilst also adding more weapon damage for each stack as well. Finally, we have Haze's fourth ability, Bullet Dance, which is similar to Reaper from Overwatch, where she'll enter a flurry, firing her weapon at all nearby enemies with perfect accuracy. She also gains a fire rate bonus and evades some incoming bullets fired at her. Maxing this simply increases its damage and lets her cast it more often with a reduced cooldown. So if you are a fan of stealthy outplays, huge flanks and big cleanups, give Haze a go. Infernus is an explosive carry who lights up the battlefield with loads of DPS. He's a mobile engager who inflicts burns with his abilities to tear through enemies' health pools with his signature finger gun. His first ability is Catalyst, which spews napalm that slows enemies' movement and amplifies the damage Infernus deals to them. Maxing this helps Infernus maximize his healing whilst debuffing enemies' healing at the same time. It also grants him an extra charge, lifesteal from targets, and adds more damage amp too. His second ability is Flame Dash, which allows him to charge forward at high speed and leave behind a flame trail that burns his enemies. Maxing this slows enemies' fire rate, adds more damage, and reduces its cooldown significantly. His third ability is Afterburn, which makes his bullets build up to apply a burning effect on his enemies, and his bullets and abilities will refresh this duration too. Maxing this just deals more damage to the enemies you're already shooting at, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not super strong. Finally, his fourth ability is Concussive Combustion, which literally turns him into a living bomb that explodes after a short delay, stunning all enemies in its radius. Maxing this reduces its cooldown, extends its stun duration and radius, deals more damage, and lets him heal off all the enemies hit by the explosion. So if you are a fan of lighting up the battlefield with huge engages and tons of DPS, give Infernus a go. Ivy is one of the most versatile heroes to play in the game, with a wide range of different playstyles to suit any game or team comp. Whether you want to play as a DPS carry, a split-pushing roamer, or even a full utility support, she has all the tools you need. Ivy's first ability is Kudzu Bomb, which summons a patch of choking vines that damage and slow enemies in its radius. Maxing this gives it an additional charge, a longer duration, and adds more damage too. Her second ability is Watcher's Covenant, which connects with allies to buff them up with fire rates, bullet lifesteal, and healing. Maxing this buffs up Ivy's supportive playstyle with increased buffs including additional fire rate and movement speed and an extra tether too. Her third ability is Stone Form, which turns her into a gargoyle before smashing into the ground, stunning and damaging her enemies. It also heals her for a percentage of her max health. Maxing this upgrades her defensive and engaging potential with a lower cooldown, more damage, a longer stun and increased healing. Then finally we have Ivy's fourth ability, Airdrop, which allows her to take flight with an ally or bomb and drop it to cause a large explosion that slows her enemies. Ivy and any allies gain a bullet shield when flying ends, and when lifted grants her ally bullet resist. Maxing this grants additional debuffs like reducing enemies' bullet resist and additional buffs for her allies like more survivability with an improved bullet shield. It also increases the blast radius and applies a silence on enemies hit at max rank. So if you love that jack of all trades hero that can literally do it all, give Ivy a go. Kelvin is a versatile, ice-cold hero who can adapt to a wide range of playstyles. He's easy to pick up and learn but can really impact the game in a number of different ways, from frontlining as a tank, becoming more supportive with healing, or pushing and applying pressure across the map. His first ability is Frost Grenade, where he throws a grenade that explodes in a cloud of ice, damaging and slowing his enemies. Maxing this gives it an extra charge, lets you provide AoE healing to yourself and your teammates, and generally increases the damage too. His second ability is Ice Path, which essentially turns him into Frozone, allowing him to glide up and around the map with extra movement speed bonuses to himself and his allies. He also gains slow resistance for its duration. Maxing this gives him insane map mobility, as it reduces the cooldown, increases the sprint speed, and gives him bonus spirit power as he creates paths. His third ability is Arctic Beam, where he shoots freezing cold energy out in front of him, damaging enemies and building up movement speed and fire rate slows against them. Kelvin does have reduced movement speed whilst using this beam though. Maxing this makes it so much stronger in teamfights, as the beam will also bounce onto additional targets and reduce the cooldown and add more damage as well. Finally, we have his fourth ability, Frozen Shelter, which freezes the air around him, creating an impenetrable dome of ice. Inside the dome, allies rapidly regenerate health and enemies are slowed. Maxing this will increase its fire rate slow, lower its cooldown significantly, and also boost the health regen inside. This build makes Kelvin a bit of a tanky frontline beast when fully upgraded. So if you're a fan of skating around the map protecting allies and beaming down enemies, give Kelvin a go. Lady Geist sacrifices her own health to cast her abilities and drains back that life from her enemies. She's amazing in 1v1 fights as she can swap her health with her target, turning around all sorts of bad situations into winning ones. Her first ability is Essence Bomb, which sacrifices some of her health to launch a bomb that deals damage after a brief delay. Maxing this gives her more AoE potential with a larger bomb radius, more damage, and even a damage over time toxic pool too. Lady Geist's second ability is Life Drain, which applies a tether to her enemy that drains health back to her. She has reduced movement speed whilst using this, but can use other abilities during that drain timer. Maxing this increases her dueling power in close range and melee matchups, by increasing its DPS and duration and even adding a silence. Her third ability is Malice, which again sacrifices some of her health to launch blood shards that apply stacks. Each stack slows her enemy and increases the damage they take from her. Maxing this skill lets her use it more often, increases its damage, and increases the number of shards in that fan projectile. Finally, we have her fourth ability, Soul Exchange, which swaps health levels with an enemy target. There is a minimum percentage enemies can be brought down to, and a minimum amount of health received for her, based on the target's current health. Maxing this ability will reduce its cooldown, it will make the swap more potent in terms of enemies' minimum health, and even grants buffs to her fire rate and spirit resist at max rank. So if you love draining, nuking, and outplaying your enemies with huge ultimates, give Lady Geist a try. Lash is a high-octane hero who thrives on getting up close and personal and finishing off his enemies with aggressive combos and outplays. He definitely does take a bit of practice to get used to, but once you've got the hang of him, he is extremely rewarding to play as you slam and swing your way through enemy teams. His first ability is Ground Strike, where he'll stomp the ground beneath him, damaging enemies in front. If he casts this whilst airborne, he'll dive towards the ground. Maxing this allows him to cast it more often, adds a knock up and a slow, and also improves the damage and scaling significantly. His second ability is Grapple, where he pulls himself through the air towards a target. It also restores one stamina charge and all air jumps and dashes. Maxing this allows him to cast it more often, increases the cast range, and gives a damage buff which is absolutely huge at max rank. This is one of the best mobility skills in the game, so when you do get the hang of it, your outplay potential will be massive. His third ability is Flog, where he strikes enemies with his whip, stealing life from them. Maxing this will slow enemies, reduce the whip's cooldown, and finally deal more damage, whilst reducing enemies' fire rate too. Then finally we have his fourth ability, Death Slam, and yes, it's as cool as it sounds. Lash will focus onto enemies to connect whips to them, and after channeling, connected enemies are lifted and then stunned and slammed into the ground, dealing damage and slowing them. Maxing this increases its range, meaning he can catch enemies from further away. It will also deal more damage and at max rank reduce its cooldown significantly too. This is an amazing team fighting ability that can easily sway fights in his favour if used in the right moments. So if getting stuck into teams with close range burst and CC is your thing, give Lash a go. McGinnis is a versatile hero that most players can pick up and easily be impactful on. She's got great pushing power and lane control with her turrets and large magazine, as well as fantastic healing and teamfight utility with her wall. McGinnis' first ability is her most iconic one, her mini turrets. These automatically shoot enemies and expire after a limited lifetime. They also gain some of her max health and spirit resist. Maxing these turrets makes her lane control even stronger by giving her more turrets that apply slows, extra attack range and fire rate, and then finally extra DPS at max rank too. Her second ability is Medicinal Spectre, which deploys a spirit that heals nearby units. Maxing this increases the heal's potency, gives her an attack speed buff and lets her use it more often. The final skill point scales it with total health, so your allied tanks will be even harder to take down in teamfights. Her third skill is Spectral Wall, that creates a wall to divide terrain in half. The wall also deals damage and slows nearby enemies upon creation. Maxing this reduces its cooldown, amplifies her damage afterwards, and reduces enemy stamina on hit. It also adds a brief stun to enemies hit at max rank. Finally, her fourth ability is Heavy Barrage, which unleashes a volley of rockets that home in on a targeted location. Maxing this adds a slow, makes it usable much more often, and deals a lot more damage. So if you love controlling lanes, healing up your teammates, and splitting up enemies with huge walls, give McGinnis a go. Mirage is a scarab shooting hero with the ability to turn himself into a tornado to set up fights for his teammates. He's a tank shredding, teleporting terror that excels at chasing down fleeing targets and comboing up with his allies. Mirage's first ability is Tornado, where he transforms himself into a tornado that travels forward, damaging and lifting enemies into the air. After this tornado ends, he also gains bullet evasion. Maxing this extends the lift duration, reduces its cooldown, and improves its bullet evasion too. His second ability is Fire Scarabs, and each scarab can be launched separately, stealing max health from enemies and applying bullet resist reduction. Mirage can't apply multiple scarabs to the same enemy though. Maxing this lets him send scarabs more often, further reducing enemies' bullet resist and improving the max health steal at max rank. Mirage's third ability is Jin's Mark, which is a passive ability that makes his shots apply an increasing multiplier on his target. Upon hitting max stacks or when the multiplier expires, it will then be consumed and the enemy will take spirit damage and be revealed briefly on the minimap. Maxing this adds a pretty huge slow, improves the duration and damage, and also increases the max multiplier at rank 3. Finally, we have his fourth ability, Traveler. Now this is a channeled ability that lets Mirage teleport to any ally or visible enemy hero on the minimap. After teleporting, he also gains movement speed and increased fire rate until next reload. Maxing this lets him teleport more often and improves the movement speed and fire rate bonus. So if desert DPS and disruption sounds like your thing, give Mirage a go. Mo and Krill combine to form a super tank that thrives on disrupting the battlefield with a collection of slows, disarms and CC. They have a ton of durability and tankiness but also pack some surprising damage at the same time. Their first ability is Scorn, where they deal damage to nearby enemies and heal up based on the damage done, the heal being stronger against enemy heroes. Maxing this allows them to cast this more often, deal more damage and apply a stacking debuff that can quickly catch enemies off guard, who might just be a bit surprised at how much damage this can deal. Their second ability is Burrow, where they burrow underground gaining movement speed, spirit and bullet armor, and then they can jump out knocking enemies into the air and performing a spin attack that deals damage and slows. Maxing this gives them extra mobility by allowing them to use this more often and for extended durations, but it also deals more damage when they emerge too. Their third ability is Sandblast, where they simply spray sand that disarms enemies in front of them and deals damage. Maxing this increases the disarm duration, lowers its cooldown too, and adds a hefty slow to enemies as well. Simply just putting 1 or 2 points into this is never a bad choice, as that disarm can really make the difference. Finally, we have their fourth ability, simply called Combo, that holds a target in place, stunning them and dealing damage during its channel. This is a very specific shutdown ability to catch out the enemy carry and take them down quickly with the help from your allies. Maxing this reduces its cooldown, increases that lockdown duration, and adds some extra damage and lifesteal. If burrowing underground, ganking, roaming, and setting up fights sounds like your thing, give Mo and Krill a try. Paradox is a versatile playmaker with a super high skill ceiling. She can be difficult to learn but does feel incredibly rewarding once you get the hang of her, and if you are coordinated with your allies, her impact can be amazing. Her first ability is Pulse Grenade, which throws a grenade that pulses when it lands. Each pulse applies damage, slows, and stacking damage amp for her. Maxing this improves her AoE damage in teamfights or just for wave clear or clearing camps, by increasing the number of pulses, upgrading its damage per pulse, and allowing it to be used more often. Her second ability is Time Warp, which creates a warping wall that stops time for all enemy projectiles and bullets that touch it. Maxing this maximizes her defensive capabilities by giving it a larger size, a second charge, and even silences enemies who touch it. Her third ability is Kinetic Carbine, where she charges her weapon and gains increased movement speed whilst charged. Her next shot releases the energy, dealing spirit damage and applying a time stop to the enemy hit. She can then slow time on herself whilst an empowered shot is available. Maxing this increases her playmaking power by increasing the max time stop duration, lowering this ability's cooldown, and increasing movement speed and damage amplification. Finally, we have her fourth ability, Paradoxical Swap, where she fires a projectile that swaps her position with the enemy target. She gains spirit lifesteal here, and the enemy hero affected takes damage over time. Maxing this increases its cast range, deals more damage, and reduces its cooldown too. So if you enjoy playing high skill ceiling heroes with huge playmaking power, then look no further than Paradox. Pocket is a mobile shotgun wielding carry with a ton of outplay potential packed into their kit. They excel at getting stuck into the thick of things, dealing tons of damage, and getting out to fight another day. Pocket's first ability is Barrage, where they channel to start launching projectiles that deal damage and slow around their impact point. Each projectile from the barrage grants them a stacking buff that amplifies all of their damage. If casted in the air, Pocket will float and maintain any horizontal momentum they started with. Maximizing Barrage increases its damage per projectile, lowers its cooldown, and increases its damage amp per stack. Their second ability is Flying Cloak, which launches a cloak that travels forward and damages enemies. They can then recast this to teleport to its location. Maxing this allows Pocket to cast it more often, improves its AoE damage, and grants them a weapon damage buff after the TP. Overall, a great path if you want to play more of a split pushing playstyle. Their third ability is Enchanter's Satchel, where they escape into their suitcase for a few seconds and then when they come back out, deal damage to all nearby enemies. Maxing this really makes Pocket hard to kill, as they can cast this super often. It will also now deal more damage and apply a fire rate debuff too. Finally, we have their fourth ability, Affliction. This skill applies damage over time to all enemies nearby. However, the damage is non-lethal and does not apply item procs. Maxing Affliction turns Pocket into an AoE damage over time monster by reducing its cooldown, suppressing enemy healing, and dealing additional damage too. If close range burst, AoE nukes, and tons of mobility sound like your thing, give Pocket a go. 7 is an electric powerhouse with tons of AoE damage with his ultimate. He's easy to pick up and learn quickly and can often snowball and carry super hard, especially so at lower ranks. 7's first ability is his Lightning Ball, which shoots in a straight line, dealing damage to all targets in its radius, slowing down when it hits enemies and stops if it hits the world. Maxing this skill gives it more charges, it slows enemies caught, and increases its damage. This skill is core to 7's wave clear and trading power. His second ability is his Static Charge, which applies a charge to a target enemy and after a short duration stuns and damages enemies in the area. Maxing this gives you more chances to stun from a greater distance and for a whole second longer. As this is a point and click ability, the increased range can really make the difference and make enemies think twice about getting close to you. This is 7's only real defensive ability, so be careful with its usage. 7's third ability is Power Surge, which buffs up your weapon, making your bullets proc shock damage on your target, which bounces to others near your enemy. Maxing this is the best way to unlock 7's insane DPS potential. More damage, more AoE, and more often. Finally, we have 7's fourth ability, which is his huge AoE Storm Cloud, dealing tons of damage to all enemies around you within line of sight. This is a channeled ability which can be interrupted by your enemies, so you'll need to time it perfectly to use its full potential. Maxing this makes you more durable whilst channeling, but also increases the range, damage, and duration too. If you love lightning, thunderstorms, and big AoE devastation, give 7 a go. Shiv is an aggressive close-range carry who pokes with knives before getting stuck in to burst his enemies down. He has excellent mobility and super high damage, but he does have to choose the perfect time to execute his opponents without being punished too easily. Shiv's gun has 2 ways to fire. His main left click for medium range, but if you're up close and personal, you can right click instead for a more powerful blast that uses up more ammo and knocks him back slightly. His first ability is Serrated Knives, where he'll throw a knife that damages and slows an enemy. Each additional knife hit adds a stack and refreshes the debuff duration, causing the damage to increase with each knife hit. Maxing this gives those knives an extra charge, adds more damage and makes enemies bleed. So if you are wanting to play around poke, this is the skill to go for. Shiv's ultimate also unlocks an added bonus to his abilities, and for his knives, when his rage is full, the knives will ricochet to nearby enemies and slow them whilst they bleed. His second ability is called Slice and Dice, which performs a dash forward, damaging enemies in its path. Maxing this skill allows him to use it more often, do more damage, and reduce the cooldown for each enemy hit. And if you max this early, you'll deal more damage with it, but also be less punishable with the reduced cooldown. His ultimate unlock for this ability allows him to echo himself, which retraces the dash path, damaging enemies again, but only when his rage is full. His third ability is Bloodletting, which defers damage dealt to him to be taken as damage over time instead. He can activate this to clear a portion of the deferred damage. Maxing this stretches out the duration of the damage over time, also reducing its cooldown, and then at max rank defers the damage dealt even more. His ultimate unlock increases the amount of damage deferred even further when he's got full rage. Finally, we have Shiv's fourth ability, Killing Blow, which leaps towards an enemy hero and instantly kills them if their health is below the kill threshold. Maxing this ability allows Shiv to move faster, execute at a higher threshold, but also reset this ability on a successful kill. So if dashing and diving into team fights and executing your enemies is your thing, give Shiv a go. Vindicta is the classic sniper character to play in Deadlock, and she's all about levitating above the battlefield, bursting down enemies with her ultimate. She snowballs extremely hard due to the bonus souls she gains from each successful killing blow, so she can run away with games in no time at all. Vindicta's first ability is Stake, where she throws a stake that tethers enemies to the location where it lands, restricting enemies' movement. Maxing this increases its duration, lowers the cooldown, and adds a disarm at max rank. Her second ability is Flight, where as you'll expect, she leaps into the air and hovers over the battlefield, allowing her to snipe enemies down from above. Whilst in flight, her weapon deals bonus spirit damage too. Maxing this lets her stay airborne for longer and grants additional damage along with extra spirit damage per bullet. Her third ability is Crow Familiar, where her crow deals damage on impact and applies a bleed that deals damage based on the target's current health. Maxing this gives it ricochet bounces, reduces its cooldown, and improves its bleed alongside suppressing enemy healing. You want to aim to lead with this ability before sniping enemies down. Finally, we have her fourth ability, Assassinate, which is where she can use her scoped rifle to fire extremely powerful shots at very long distances. This deals only partial damage until it's fully charged, and then deals bonus damage to enemies with less than 50% health. Maxing this is quite often the way to go, as it's her bread and butter ability. The extra bonus souls from kills at max rank really helps her snowball. Ranking up this ability also gives her a lower cooldown and bonus damage to make those killing blows more potent. If soaring above the map, sniping and executing your enemies is your thing, then give Vindicta a go. Viscous is a disruptive green gooey beast that can be an absolute nightmare for enemy teams to deal with due to his crowd control and mobility. He has his ultimate goo ball that lets him bounce around like a wrecking ball and has some super strong defensive tools as well to protect himself and his teammates. Viscous has his standard left click to fire, but then also has a right click alternate fire which has a larger projectile which also uses up more ammo. His first ability though is called Splatter, where he throws a ball of goo that deals damage and leaves puddles behind that slow his enemies. Maxing this gives it a lower cooldown, more damage, a larger radius, and 2 extra bounces as well. His second ability is the Cube, which encases himself or the target in a cube of restorative goo that removes debuffs, protects them from damage, and increases health regen too. Maxing this lowers its cooldown, improves its movement speed and stamina recovery, and health regen too. This can be an amazing defensive tool, so maxing it will definitely improve his utility. His third ability, Puddle Punch, materializes a fist that punches units in the area and sends them flying. Enemies hit will take damage and have their dash distance and movement speed reduced. Maxing this gives it another charge, adds more damage, and increases its slow whilst reducing its cooldown. This ability takes some practice to learn all the different angles and places in the world to use it best in, and just be careful you don't punch your allies into danger. Finally, we have his fourth ability, Goo Ball, where he morphs into a ball of goo that bounces off walls and can double jump. The ball deals damage and stuns enemies in its path and also grants large amounts of bullets and spirit resist. Maxing this will increase its duration, adds more damage, but also at max rank allows the ability to use his other skills and items whilst he's rolling around. So if bouncing around the battlefield, disrupting fights and protecting your teammates is your thing, give Viscous a try. Warden is a meaty bruiser duelist who can chase down enemies with blinding speed and really hold down a frontline too. He has huge impact in teamfights by reducing enemy stamina and locking down key enemy targets. Warden's first ability throws a flask that deals damage, slows and reduces the weapon damage and stamina of enemies that it hits. Maxing this skill improves its burst damage, increases its stamina reduction, lowers the cooldown further even though it's already a relatively spammable ability, and adds a fire rate slow too. Warden's second ability is Willpower, which grants him a spirit shield and bonus movement speed, helping him chase and engage onto his enemies. Maxing this skill improves the movement speed steroid, halves its cooldown and gives an even stronger spirit shield. His third ability is Binding Word, which curses an enemy hero. If they fail to move away from their initial position within the escape time, they'll be damaged and immobilized. Maxing this skill gives a longer immobilized duration, it reduces this ability's cooldown too, and adds additional bullet damage against snared targets. Finally, we have Warden's fourth ability, which after charging up for a few seconds releases pulses that damage enemies and heal him based on the damage done. Maxing this ability increases the AoE pulse radius, increases its damage and lets you cast it more often. If you love roaming, chasing and beating down your enemies whilst leading the line for your team, give Warden a go. Wraith is a versatile duelist who excels at split pushing, obliterating waves and locking down enemies with her ultimate. She also has fantastic poke and is tough to get hold of due to her teleport. Wraith's first ability summons cards when she deals weapon damage, and she can activate this to throw those cards at her enemies. Maxing this gives it a second charge, more damage and accelerates its summoning rate, maximizing her long range poke and burst. Her second ability is Project Mind, which allows her to teleport to a targeted location. Maxing this makes Wraith incredibly hard to punish by giving her teleport a big range boost. It also lets her cast it more often and makes her a bit more durable at the same time, with an additional shield on use. Her third ability is Full Auto, which is a steroid that temporarily increases her fire rate and her allies' fire rate too, but for a smaller bonus. Maxing this skill reduces its cooldown, adds spirit damage per bullet, and even adds some bullet lifesteal too. Finally, we have her fourth ability, Telekinesis, which lifts an enemy into the air, stuns them, and then when the lift ends, they also take damage. Maxing this ability lowers its cooldown, increases the duration of the CC, and turns it from a single target ability to AoE. If split pushing, poking, and catching out enemies with CC and burst is your jam, then give Wraith a go. Finally, let's go over our last Deadlock hero in today's video, Yamato. Yamato is a complex carry that can simply go god mode with her ultimate that lets her become invincible and resets all of her basic ability cooldowns. She has one of the highest skill ceilings in the game and can outplay enemies against all of the odds when mastered. Yamato has two firing options, left click for a standard attack with a small width, or her right click which sends a cluster of small bombs that deal AoE damage. Yamato's first ability is Power Slash, where she can channel to increase damage and then release a fully charged sword strike. She can trigger the strike early to deal partial damage too. Maxing this skill gives it utility with bullet resist whilst channeling and a movement slow along with more damage upon fully charging. Her second skill is Flying Strike, where she throws a grappling hook to reel herself towards an enemy, damaging and slowing her target. Maxing this grants an additional movement slow, increases its cast range and adds a boost in weapon damage after it lands. Her third ability is Crimson Slash, where she slashes enemies in front of her, damaging them and slowing their fire rate. She also heals if she hits any enemy heroes. Maxing this gives her more survivability with the increased healing, but also reduces its cooldown and increases the fire rate slow too. Finally, we have her fourth ability, Shadow Transformation, where after an initial invincible transformation, her abilities are refreshed and are much faster than usual. Her weapon also now has infinite ammo and she gains damage resists and immunity to negative status effects. While she is in this mode, she is simply unable to die. Maxing this lowers its cooldown significantly, grants more movement speed and extends its duration too. So if activating God mode and slashing through entire teams is your thing, give Yamato a go. Well, that brings us to the end of today's video, speaking about each and every Deadlock hero so far and what each of their abilities do. Maybe now you've got a better idea of what you're coming up against or what hero you actually want to main for yourself. Or maybe if you already have tons of experience in the game, hopefully you learned something new today too. Don't forget that if you do want to use the best builds from our experts for each and every hero, then click the link in the description and check out our expert builds telling you which items are the best choices to go for and why. Thanks for watching guys, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.